It is now my pleasure to introduce to you a woman who has been at Meredith College since 2001. She's an associate professor in religious and ethical studies. Prior to coming here, Dr. Margarita Suarez spent 1 year as a Riley Dissertation Fellow at Colorado College in Colorado Springs. She has her PhD in Contemporary Christian Thought from Northwestern University, a Master's of Divinity from Harvard University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Theater and Religion from Fordham University at Lincoln Center in New York City. Her research specialties are religion in Cuba and the importance of pedagogy and assessment in the use of fieldwork for the study of religion. Join me in welcoming Dr. Margarita Fellow.
Good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be here. I would like to thank, before I begin, I'd like to thank my mentor and friend, Dr. Rosemary Radford Ruther, for her innovative work in the field of eco-feminist theology. A lot of what I'm going to say today comes out of this foundational understanding of how to do theology from an eco-feminist perspective. One generation goes, another comes, but the earth remains the same forever. Words of the author of the book of Ecclesiastes. Is this still true? From a perspective out of which ecofeminism and ecofeminist theology comes, there is a particular method in the way you begin to do theological interpretation. It starts with experience. What is the experience of the person, or in this case, the earth, and those who have been disenfranchised from the earth? What and how do they name their experience? Secondly, we look at analysis. Historical analysis, sociological analysis, anthropological analysis, economic analysis, all kinds of analysis to understand how the experience had been developed. Once we do these first two steps, we then look at theology. How is it that we have come to understand, in this particular case, sin and reconciliation? Lastly, what this particular method asks us to do is to act. It is called the praxis step. How do we act now that we have understood the experience, worked through the analysis, done the theological thinking? Then we must act. What I'm going to talk about today is more the first three parts, because I think that ultimately action is something that each of us has to come up with. Heather just gave us some wonderful ideas about action, about reducing our use of toxic plastic materials. So she gave us one praxis item. Hopefully what we can do throughout this day is learn and come up with other options, other ways of being environmentally conscious, and make our choices about how we move to our action. The earth cannot speak for herself. She must have advocates to speak for her, to interpret how she is being harmed, to name that which is sin, to think theologically about how we name sin, and therefore how we talk about reconciliation and salvation. Sin has often been defined as the individual straying from the correct ways of doing what is good and straight, an offense, an individual offense against God and that which separates us from God. Throughout much of history, throughout much of Western theological history, sin has been defined as wrong relationship between humans, that which creates a gap between ourselves and God. It is different in Jewish thought than in Christian thought, and so I'm going to give you just a little bit of that difference before we move on. In classic Jewish thought, there is the understanding that humans have a good impulse and an evil impulse. There is not a sense of the fallen nature of humanity. There is not the need for a savior to save one from one's fallenness, to get you back into the good graces of God. Rather, it is recognized that humans have the potential, the great potential, both the capacity for justice and the capacity to repair the world through that justice, and the possibility of creating great evil, of creating more brokenness, exile, and suffering. In Christianity, sin has historically been understood as individual moral failure. We are gluttonous, prideful, lustful, slothful, greedy, envious, and angry. These base, lower passions of the human need to be subdued or they will destroy us. The idea that these particular qualities of fallenness are individual and we need from this individual sense to be rescued or saved. Although one can see the nature and the will of God through the visible creation, you've chosen to do evil acts, and therefore God has, it is said, given us up to evil and a deluded state of life. We have lost the choice to do good. Due to Adam's sin, we are incapable of extricating ourselves from this vicious cycle, and therefore we need Christ's salvation, which will bring us back to the power of goodness and spirituality. The death and the resurrection of Christ breaks this power of fallenness of life and establishes a redeemed mode of life. It is only through the grace given by the redemptive work of Christ that humans can make the choice to do good. We cannot do it on our own. The redeemed self experiences its ultimate transformation in the resurrected body. This is not simply a return to the original state, but something new, an improvement upon the person, the human, the body. This kind of evaluation of the moral life, which includes evil and the fruit of sin needing individual redemption, has developed, Ruther would say, into an earth-fleeing ethic and an earth-fleeing spirituality. It has been central to our understanding of neglect of the earth, our connection of neglect of others, of children, of those who are less, of those who have no power, of those who are vulnerable, and even to our understanding of the earth as that which we can dominate. We have the ability, because we have been given the earth, to dominate over the earth because we as humans are better than the earth. And we have neglected to recognize the responsibility that humans have to fix, to repair, to move to a new understanding of sin. Sin is not only individual. Sin is social. The domination that we humans have felt toward each other over different races and different classes and different genders, and the earth itself creates more than just pride and lust and greed and anger and sloth, but racism and sexism and classism, heterosexism, and environmental degradation. We add to the 7 deadly sins the social sins. We have learned how to throw away things as we have learned how to throw away people. And the problem is that if we continue to base our understanding of sin on only these individual sins that we have of greed or pride, if all we do is understand sin in its individual psychological or physical senses, one is greedy and doesn't care. That's sin. One is prideful and is concerned only for one's own well-being. That is sin. One is filled with lust and has therefore perverted the natural created order of sexuality. That is sin. If each person is only seen as responsible for their own sin and pain and sinfulness, then we cannot move to understanding the collective need, the social structures which cause us to degrade each other and the earth. Ecofeminism says that sin, as separation from God, includes wrong relationship between humans and the rest of nature, which fosters not only economic and political injustice, not only racism, sexism, and all of the isms, but indeed the destruction of the entire created order. Ecofeminism understands sin as the problem of social domination by those with the power to create laws and systems that benefit themselves, to keep the status quo, leaving the earth, the poor, the socially weak, the different, the animal, to fend for themselves. Reconciliation and the transformation of these relationships cannot succeed unless human attitudes of domination over the human and the non-human creation are recognized as sin and uprooted. Earth healing, meaning healed relationships between men and women, between classes, between nations, between humans and the earth, can only occur when, first of all, we recognize the social and earthly domination that is seen as sin. We need to think of creation and redemption as interrelated one with the other. The God who made heaven and earth is the same God that redeemed the slaves from slavery in Egypt. The creation and the redemption should not be differentiated one from the other into two separate spheres. The affirmation of God is an affirmation of redemption that is no more foundational than the affirmation of creation. God is one, immanent, interpersonal, walking with us in the garden, and transcendent, creating the sun, the earth, the trees, the plants, the animals, the sea creatures, and those living on the land, as well as the human with a word from on high. So God is both social and natural, knitting together, chastising the human when we have too much pride, absolutely, but also claiming authority over the earth for which we are only the caretakers. And we have to recognize that in this caretaking, we have a communal and social function. Lastly, I want to talk about covenant, because I think that covenant is a centrally important concept to how we move and understand from our initial created self to that which has responsibility over more than just our initial created self and more than just for our individual selves. Covenant is about bringing together. It is about community. It is about recognizing our relationships, not only our individual relationship with God, but our relationships with each other and our relationships with the earth. We have no right to wipe out any other form of life because it is different or other or perceived by us as less. So as the tree stands to shade us, so we are responsible to keep the tree alive. The covenant made with one of our earliest ancestors, Abraham, included the gift of land, not as a possession, but that which could be part of the people's history in their relationship with God. It says in the book of Leviticus, if the people of God pollute the land with iniquity, the land will vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. And so this covenantal aspect also requires us to think about another idea, which is that of Sabbath, of rest. The land needs rest. The land needs to have time to recover from what we have done to it. Within the biblical text, again in Leviticus, which I know not a lot of people read, but I find Leviticus very powerful. In Leviticus, it says, not only do you rest on the seventh day, but you rest your land in the seventh year. And in 7 times 7 years, there is the Jubilee year where all creation is supposed to come back to its original state, returned in the Jubilee year, so that it is a time of fixing unjust relationships. It's a time of repairing the disorder that we humans have caused. A time when we recognize the overwork of our animals, the overwork of our land, the exploitation that we have created, the systems of domination that we have put into place, and to change that, to repair it, to create harmonious relations with human and animal, earth, and water. In closing, I would like to read the words of the prophet Isaiah. For behold, I am creating a new heaven and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered. They shall never come to mind. Be glad then and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I shall create Jerusalem as a joy. Never again shall there be heard the sounds of weeping and wailing. No more shall there be an infant or a graybeard who does not live out his days. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and enjoy their fruit. They shall not build for others to dwell in, or plan for others to enjoy. For the days of my people shall be as long as the days of a tree. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. Thank you.